Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here's a look at some of the stories we have lined up for you tonight. For the first time in nearly 19 months, the federal government tables its budget. We have reaction from political columnist Brian Lilley. Plus, police investigate the death of a man at a BC Ostrich protest camp. And soccer star David Beckham shares his thoughts on being knighted by King Charles.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks for joining us. After 19 months of waiting, the Mark Carney government has released its first federal budget. The Liberals are betting their political fortunes on a $581 billion budget that will slash the ranks of the federal public service, add billions for new housing, hospitals, ports, and defense. It includes $141 billion in new federal spending over the next 5 years, but with that comes a $78 billion deficit, which is almost double the projected shortfall in the government's fiscal update almost a year ago. It's also larger than the $68.5 billion deficit the independent parliamentary budget officer projected in September. Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne calls it a Buy Canadian budget.
We will do all this by being our own best customer to the new Buy Canadian policy. It's about time that we put Canadian suppliers first.
When the government buys, Canadian suppliers will be our first choice whenever possible. Full stop. Because we believe in Canada. We will use
steel made by our workers in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie.
We will use aluminum cast in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean, Bécancour, and Kitimat. And we will use softwood lumber cut in Thunder Bay, Prince George, and even in my region of Latuque.
Workers, we will support our country.
Carney's Liberals plan to curb federal spending by about $58.2 billion over 5 years by slashing public service jobs. The reduction to the civil service include cutting the equivalent of 16,000 full-time positions with a goal of shrinking the workforce by a total of 40,000 jobs by 2028 to 29. There will be much discussion about this budget in the days to come, but to get some perspective right now, we spoke with Bridge City News political contributor and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley. He outlines what stood out for him.
Well, we were told this was going to be an austerity budget, that this would be a cutting budget, that this would be a budget about generational change. And really, it's not either. There's a lot of new spending in this budget. Spending is up actually 7%. The deficit comes in at a whopping $78.3 billion. You know, in the 2024 budget, which was delivered 18 months ago, they projected that the deficit for the current fiscal year would come in at $38.9 billion. And then by December of last year, they'd updated it to $42 billion. Now it's $78.3. We've got program spending going up dramatically. We've got $150 million extra dollars for CBC and an attempt to get Canada into the Eurovision Song Contest. And, an easy win if they wanted to cut ineffective spending was to drop the gun confiscation program, which I know is not popular in Alberta. Premier Smith trying to do an awful lot to block that. Well, that got extra money in this budget as well. There's some good things in here, don't get me wrong, but this was not either an austerity budget, and even on what it did to try and fix the economy, it's not a generational change budget either. The Carney government is once again overselling and under-delivering.
As for whether the budget will pass, Brian will have more about that on Wednesday when he joins us for a deeper dive into the federal budget. Canadian Taxpayers Federation President Franco Terrazzano is also weighing in on the budget. He says the size of the deficit is shocking.
Well, the government is borrowing like crazy, and the debt is spiraling out of control because spending is spiraling out of control. I mean, the federal government is going to borrow almost $80 billion this year. And, massive deficits, massive spending means more money being wasted on interest charges, right? Debt interest charges will cost taxpayers more than $1 billion every single week. And welcome to Canada, folks. Now, every single dollar that you're paying in federal sales tax is going to pay interest charges on the debt. The government should be cutting spending, right? After a decade of out of control spending more money than Trudeau did, that's a failure. The government has to cut spending, cut taxes, right? The government is spending like crazy, wasting money on debt interest charges like crazy. What we have to see today, right? The government is always talking about finding savings in the future, right? It's the government is always promising to go on a diet starting Monday, but then Monday never comes, right? We need enough is enough with all the talk, with all the planning. The time to cut spending is now.
And now that the budget has been tabled, the next step will be getting it passed through Parliament. Federal politicians of all stripes say they don't want the coming budget vote to trigger a Christmas election, but nobody's ruling it out, which means voters might soon have to resist the temptation to drop a lump of coal in the ballot box. The governing Liberals are 3 seats shy of a majority, so they'll need some opposition MPs to either vote for the budget or abstain from the vote later this month in order to avoid an early election. The Conservatives, Bloc Québécois, and NDP have said publicly what they want to see in the budget in exchange for their support. On this federal budget day, with so much talk about dollars and cents, the Salvation Army has released a new report that suggests Canadians are less optimistic about their finances than last year and more worried about job security. The survey found more than 85% of respondents felt U.S. tariffs and the trade dispute have driven up the cost of everyday essentials.
Certainly, we see a lot of Canadians responding to the survey expressing that they have seen this to be true. Over 85% are saying groceries and essential items are certainly becoming more expensive, something that I think we all know to be true. But certainly this hits low-income families the hardest. And so when we see that, when we see the responses from Canadians, nearly 4 in 5 are believing that U.S. trade policy conversation is really hitting those low-income families very, very hard, especially when we think about single-parent households as well. We're seeing that charitable giving is decreasing. We've seen a drop, about 2 to 3% drop in giving as compared to last year. So these are some of the concerns that we're hearing from Canadians, that we're seeing at our front door in over 400 communities across Canada as we continue to serve Canadians. As we consider having enough money to get to the end of the month, that's becoming more difficult for everyone, but certainly those that have been going paycheck to paycheck, and getting to the end of the month and having a little bit more that they can give to support their neighbors is becoming more and more difficult.
The Salvation Army survey was conducted by Angus Reid from September 12th to the 16th among a representative sample of more than 1,500 Canadians. Currie Dixon is set to become Yukon's first premier born in the territory. Dixon's Yukon party, formerly the Yukon Conservative Party, won a majority government on Monday. Dixon says voters wanted change to address the housing crisis, to address health care infrastructure to keep up with population growth, and changes in the judicial system that hold those who commit crimes accountable. The NDP is poised to become the official opposition as the party was elected in 6 seats with almost 38% of the vote. After a decade in power, the Yukon Liberals were crushed, winning only 1 seat in the 21-seat legislature. Well, some sad news today for the people who have been supporting a BC ostrich farm, which the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is trying to shut down. After some ostriches died from avian flu last December, the CFIA has moved in to cull the rest of the herd at Universal Ostrich Farm near Edgewood, BC. But supporters have been on site waiting to hear if the Supreme Court will hear the case. Well, on Monday, one of those supporters, a man named Tom, passed away. Katie Pasitny, co-owner of the farm, sent this message on social media.
Tom, your dedication to our family and to preserving life will always be remembered. But you know, there's a poetic irony in it, because as his body lays here and we try to, we're just waiting for him to be picked up. And Everybody worked on him tirelessly. The police worked on him tirelessly to keep him alive, to bring him back. The ostriches are 2 fences over. And they have so much life to live. These ostriches, their hearts are beating and their skin is warm, and they're pecking around the ground. And there's so much life. That's what we're here protecting right now. We're protecting life. This is life versus death. And we're protecting life.
The CFIA has taken custody of the birds until the Supreme Court decides whether to hear the case. That decision is expected later this week. Dick Cheney, the hard-charging conservative who became one of the most powerful and polarizing vice presidents in U.S. history and leading advocate for the 2003 invasion of Iraq, has died at the age of 84. Former American President George W. Bush says Dick Cheney was an honorable man whose death is a loss to the United States. Political analyst Scott Lucas looks at how Cheney will be remembered.
He'll be remembered primarily for the 2003 Iraq War, which in one way was the pinnacle of American power, and in another way was its downfall. I think there is an irony here. In later years, Dick Cheney would become a vocal critic of Donald Trump for trying to break the American system, a critic in particular of Trump's threat to democracy. But in a way, for all that criticism of Trump, Dick Cheney was part of an administration, the George W. Bush administration, that opened the way for Trump, because in a way they broke the rules. They broke the rules both before and after 9/11 because they were intent on that regime change in Iraq, that attempt to display American power by breaking the rules, not only in pursuing that invasion, but by pursuing torture, for example, by setting aside the Geneva Conventions.
Cheney's daughter, Liz Cheney, who was a vocal critic of current President Donald Trump, was removed from Republican Party leadership in May of 2021 after voting to impeach Trump. The Alberta government is aiming to make annual screening tests for students in early education mandatory in the Education Act. The new legislation, Bill 6, would require all schools to administer screening tests from kids in kindergarten to grade 3. The idea is to help teachers identify students with deficits at an early age, with Minister of Education Dimitrios Nicolaides saying the tests would address complexity head-on and ensure that children with diverse and complex needs get the help they need to thrive. But critics have arisen from the recent news, including U of L professor Rochelle Marinowski, who says it simply takes time away between the teachers and the students.
It seems unnecessary, the legislation of this, of these early assessments. There's no legislation for provincial achievement tests, no legislation for diploma exams, so it just seems like an unnecessary step. What I see and hear from teachers who are implementing these assessments is that they take hours out of instructional time. And there is one teacher that is trying to do individual assessments for 30 or 32, 33 students in the classroom. So if you consider some of these assessments take 20 minutes per student to administer, times that by 30 or 32 students, that is a lot of time that's taken away from instructional practice in the classroom. For some of the students, the teacher already knows that there is a challenge in a certain area. They don't have the time in a classroom of 32 grade 1s to spend the needed one-on-one time with that student to help them grow. So more supports in the classroom, smaller class sizes would do that.
The bill, if passed, would come into effect in the 2026-27 school year and would apply to public, separate, francophone, charter, and accredited independent school authorities and independent ECS operators. As reported Monday on Bridge City News, the number of international study permits to Canada has seen a dramatic decrease, which was especially apparent for applicants from India. Ottawa's original border legislation, Bill C2, included provisions aimed at curtailing student visas, but now that C2 has been split into two pieces of legislation, mass cancellations for groups of visa holders have been folded into what is now Bill C12. Publicly, Federal Immigration Minister Lena Metlej-Diab has said the method of mass cancellations could be used in hypothetical scenarios like wars and pandemics if it is in the public's interest. But there are reports that Ottawa is seeking greater country-specific powers targeting India and Bangladesh, where there are concerns about fraudulent use of these permits. Here in Lethbridge, the Polytechnic says the effects from government's efforts in limiting international study visas has seen a decline in international applications by over 80%, and overall international enrollment down over 40% at the institution.
Speaking with those international students that we do have, there is a level of frustration sometimes with the change in process. There's been a number of changes by our IRCC over the past couple years. So there's a greater uncertainty and kind of questioning maybe if Canada is the place they want to go to pursue education and eventually work as well. It's a big hit financially. International students pay premium tuition, which now, there is a budget hole that needs to be fixed. We're working really hard on recruiting domestic students. Over the past year, we have seen over an 80% decline in international applications. And overall enrollment is down over 40% for international students.
Like the university, the Polytechnic is seeing an increase in domestic students this year and says they are working to expand and introduce more programs that attract more domestic interests. As part of an enforcement project targeting crime, disorder, and open drug use downtown, the Lethbridge Police Service arrested 32 people and seized illicit substances. The project is one of several operations conducted throughout the year involving both uniformed and covert officers. Sergeant Ryan DeRoche, lead of the downtown policing unit, says while methamphetamine and fentanyl use remains a high, overall crime-related behavior downtown has decreased as a result of ongoing enforcement efforts.
You cannot openly use any type of drug, especially methamphetamine and fentanyl. Methamphetamine is a stimulant which makes people act crazy, and fentanyl is a depressant, which you'll see people kind of moving very slowly. We have a drug crisis going on within our city, and we work very hard to try and address that. By anyone who's openly using drugs gets stopped. In most of those cases, they get arrested. The drugs get seized. In some cases, the offenders get charged, but we just want to make it very clear that behavior is not acceptable anywhere. A lot of very good people have died within our community due to fentanyl overdoses, and that's something that we take very seriously. That's why we target those actively selling fentanyl and take those files very seriously. The main challenge we have when we deploy the teams is the releases that offenders get from our justice system. When our offenders are charged with serious offenses, in many of those cases they get released on bail, and many of our repeat offenders are already on conditions when we arrest them a second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time. Some of our most successful files in 2025 have come from our eyes and ears within the community who call us, say they see something that's out of the ordinary, and we respond to that call.
In addition to open drug use, police executed 74 warrants, seized methamphetamine and fentanyl, recovered a stolen vehicle, and laid 11 criminal charges. The City of Lethbridge unveiled their newly installed Veterans Crosswalk nearby, where the poppy flag was raised at City Hall on Tuesday. As the lead up to Remembrance Day approaches, the joint event was attended by members of the Lethbridge Legion and City Council along the temporarily renamed Veterans Way on 4th Avenue South. The new crosswalk, located directly in the Cenotaph shadow along 11th Street, follows the trend of municipalities across Canada. The design features the soldier silhouette displayed on the cenotaph alongside the words "Lest We Forget" in English and the words "So That We Know" in Blackfoot and French.
Yeah, this is an exciting project that was sponsored by myself and Mayor Higgin. We brought the proposal forward almost a year ago to the date, and we saw it in other communities happening, and we said, there's no reason why we can't do it in Lethbridge. So it's an exciting project for sure. We're going to use council contingencies to do this. It was unanimous at council at the last election, the last council, to decide that we were going to use our funds to pay for this. So we didn't want to have any fundraising, and I think the community really bought into that. There was no opposition in any way to this crosswalk. So I think it's been a win-win for everyone, and it's a great way to show remembrance for our veterans in our community and across Canada.
It brings a real sense of pride, being, a veteran, growing up, we didn't really know a whole lot about it. You know, now I'm starting to see more and more of that being brought out to the public and to the younger people, and, you know, explaining to them what the poppy's all about and, you know, why it's so important. And then this crosswalk, you know, it's another step in, you know, adding more knowledge to the kids. You know, they're going to come by and somebody's going to ask about it one day, and, you know, maybe it's something that they will want to do when they get older, right?
The crosswalk will remain in place for 3 years, after which time council will determine whether or not to keep it longer. Some interesting news from across the pond. Soccer star David Beckham is now Sir David Beckham. He was knighted on Tuesday by King Charles at Windsor Castle.
I cried, you're making me emotional. I cried when I first found out, and possibly for a few months after it as well. But, you know, this week has been really emotional because, you know, being back in London and obviously on the lead up to this day, you know, it's been not stressful. I've not been nervous. I've just been emotional. You know, I get that from my mum. I think it's because of the journey. I think it's because, you know, it's such a big moment for our family. And it's so special. I'm not insisting if they would like to call me Sir Dad or, you know, or Sir Son, they can. But no, it's going to take some getting used to, people saying it, but no, it's just a huge honour. You know, it's a huge honour to be here at Windsor Castle. It's a huge honour to receive this from His Majesty the King, and you know, it's all round a very special day for us.
Beckham was joined by his wife, Victoria, and his parents, Sandra and David, at Windsor Castle. He was knighted for his services to football and British society. Who knew that was in his future? Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne says the federal budget will offer generational investments and include something for every Canadian. He says the plan is designed to boost investment in Canada and shift trade away from an increasingly protectionist U.S. Champagne emphasizes that the budget aims to create opportunities for young people while keeping taxes manageable. He presented the Liberals' first fiscal update in a year at 4 p.m. Eastern, marking the first summary of Prime Minister Mark Carney's agenda since the spring election platform. Experts say moving to a new city involves more than just covering the cost of the move itself. Edmonton realtor Calvin Hexter advises wrapping up financial obligations like mortgages or leases and budgeting for potential penalties. Financial planner Brandon Weeb says long-distance moves can come with hefty costs for transporting or replacing furniture. He adds that people should also weigh the personal impact of leaving, support networks behind, and consider renting first to test whether a new city is the right fit or not. Shopify reported a third quarter profit of $264 million US as revenue rose from a year earlier. The profit amounted to 20 cents per diluted share for the quarter ending September 30th, down from a year ago. Revenue totaled $2.84 billion, up from last year. The company says it expects fourth quarter revenue to grow in the mid to high 20s% range year over year. Recapping one of our top stories, the Carney government unveiled its first budget today, and austerity is nowhere to be found. The 406-page budget includes almost $90 billion in net new spending items over 5 years. Those include billions of dollars for infrastructure as well as new tax opportunities for business. The budget projects a deficit of $78 billion for this fiscal year, more than double last year's estimates. Coming up, it's hard to believe it's that time of year already, but Christmas is next month, and that means it's time to get your Operation Christmas Child's shoe boxes ready. Collection is already next week. Up next, we have Kendra Shields from the Samaritan's Purse to tell us all about it. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or YouTube channel anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews.